The difference between potential and performance refers to the gap between what we could become and the consistent results that we keep producing because we deny potential. Look, the following piece is an opinion that's coming from Novan Canada. That's a non-violence advocacy network of Canada. One of the main advantages that diversity brings to this nation is the treasure trove of cultural nuggets that are subconsciously absorbed into its body politic. Look, it's one thing for Canada to recognize its diversity as a source of strength, but another altogether to consciously and intentionally mine the gold veins that are buried in the belly of its multicultural nation state.
It is one thing for Canada to recognize its diversity as a source of strength, but another altogether to consciously and intentionally mine the gold veins that are buried in the belly of this multicultural nation state. Canada promotes inclusion and respect for diversity at home and abroad, but is yet to capitalize on the greatest gains of being the very first nation in 1971 to adopt a well-defined policy of multiculturalism in the days when the ship of state was steered by Pierre Elliott Trudeau.
To reap the gains of its righteous stand for inclusion, our nation would have to become a lot more intentional, innovative, and courageous. Look, Canada is a peace-loving nation. In fact, we pride ourselves to be a nation of peacekeepers. But history would not necessarily agree, because we have had our fair share of strife and wars in the past. Even if we choose to draw a curtain of charity over the whole shebang of the 17th and the 18th century, there are those within that will say that the true Canadian identity only began to take shape during the 1812 war between the newly formed United States of America and the British Crown, with Canada as the battleground. On our side, we had the natives, white Canadians, that's the British, French, and even the Americans who were loyal to the Crown, who had emigrated in defiance of the American Declaration of Independence.
And of course, peoples of African extraction, who rarely receive mention. United in purpose, with a view to resist subjugation by America, the Canadian loyalty was tested and flavored to give us a distinct and different identity, away from the North American stand. Out of the trauma of the unwarranted 2.5-year war, we emerged with a new sense of purpose and maturity that eventually led to the 1867 celebration of Canadian independence from Britain.
A lot of waters have since passed under the bridge, but the Canadian of African extraction, given the opportunity, would have a thing or two to say. Both the enslavement and the colonial experience leave their mark on its victims. Hurt people hurt people. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., for example, noted that our cousins across the border came away with a Jekyll-Hyde disorder, a sort of schizophrenic personality on the issue of racism, an ever-present challenge that has refused to go away.
Dr. King averred that America has been torn between two selves, a self in which she proudly professes the great principles of democracy and a self in which she sadly practices the antithesis of democracy. While we are not without spot or wrinkles, the Canadian spirit has fared much better in that regard. The U.S. has never been able to take the high moral ground needed to win the war of narratives at the global level because of this complication. The African legacy in our Canadian heritage knows that the world would be a much better place today if Canada would only come out of the shadows of others to embrace poignant, eternal truths as its national standard and strategic contributions towards global peace.
Take the global war of narratives that has accompanied the Israeli-Hamas conflict, for example. Too many citizens are now confused across the nations of the world, not knowing whether to stand on the lines of political correctness or follow their heart cry. We can only imagine the global impact that a clear-cut Canadian expression of the dynamics at play would have, more so when the world is treated to a Canadian-styled palaver of African extraction, where the voice of the Arab world and the African experience would parley to defend or expose the Hamas for what it is.
The African stock has been the fly on the wall for centuries, but the witness of the Canadian of African extraction served on the plate of non-violent conversation could well be a game-changer in global politics. If only, Canada could be persuaded to step away from the shadows of her past, to deploy eternal truths, and set new standards for a world that is crying out for a new day, where all men can take up the seat of dignity, at the table of equals, without one twinge of fear. If only Canada would arm herself with eternal truths, and confront the masters of the game, and the men in the shadows for whom the sun has set. What a great world this would be.
This position was scripted by, my name is Lanny Peter Thompson. I'm a strategic consultant on the board of Novan Canada, Non-Violent Advocacy Network of Canada.